The gavel struck with an unforgiving thud, its echo vibrating through the courtroom like a cold whisper of doom. An unexpected verdict, a betrayal hidden in the folds of the law, shook the very foundation of the case. Detective Marcus Westbrook's hands trembled slightly as he held his breath, the weight of failure pressing down on him. He had worked tirelessly, sacrificed so much, but the truth he sought had slipped through his fingers. He turned to look at Laura Phillips, a victim of this betrayal, her eyes empty, as if the light inside her had been extinguished by the ruling. "I thought we had them," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of their shattered hopes. Laura didn't respond. Her gaze was distant, as if searching for something in the faces around her. The silence hung heavy, broken only by the quiet rustling of papers, the steady ticking of a clock. Was this the end of the investigation, or merely the beginning of a deeper, more dangerous game? The truth was slipping away, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the real betrayal was yet to come. Outside the courthouse, the world continued to move, indifferent to the chaos that had just unfolded inside. Detective Marcus Westbrook stood by the curb, his coat unbuttoned, eyes fixed on the busy street. He could hear the distant honking of cars, the buzz of people going about their day, yet none of it seemed real. His mind was trapped in the courtroom, replaying the verdict that had shattered everything. The case had seemed so straightforward, until it hadn't. Laura Phillips' eyes haunted him, those eyes that had once held a glimmer of hope, but were now filled with an emptiness he couldn't erase. "We failed her," Marcus muttered, the words heavy on his tongue. The wind bit at his skin, but it wasn't the cold that made him shiver. He was starting to wonder if this was the beginning of something far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. Who had turned the case? Who had betrayed them? Marcus Westbrook leaned against his car, the engine still running, as his mind raced. The case had unraveled in ways he hadn't predicted. Laura Phillips had trusted him. She had trusted the system, and yet here they were, at a dead end. The streets outside were alive, people rushing about in their everyday routines, oblivious to the storm brewing within him. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady his breathing. But then he heard a voice, a young voice, sharp and full of question. "You think it's over, don't you?" The words came from Emma Clarke, the reluctant fire starter, who had somehow found herself entangled in this mess. She stood a few feet away, arms crossed, her eyes burning with impatience. She wasn't a detective, but her mind worked like one. "It's never over, Marcus," she added, a smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. But Marcus felt it. The pull of something deeper, something darker, that he had only begun to understand. "We just begun," he muttered, his gaze now fixed on the horizon. Unsure if he was speaking to Emma or to himself, Marcus looked over at Emma, his mind still clouded with doubt. "You shouldn't be involved in this, Emma. It's too dangerous," he said, his voice heavy with concern. Emma didn't flinch. "Dangerous? The real danger is turning a blind eye. That's what we've been doing. Blindly following leads that go nowhere." She stepped closer, her tone shifting from defiance to urgency. "You know something's wrong here. We're missing something." Marcus stared at her, uncertainty flickering in his gaze. Emma had always been sharp, quick to notice what others overlooked, and now, in the cold light of their failure, Marcus couldn't ignore the truth in her words. "I can't fix this alone," he admitted, the weight of the case settling deeper in his bones. The night air around them seemed to thicken, as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. But where would it lead? The conversation between Marcus and Emma lingered in the air long after she had walked away. Marcus stared at the shadows in front of him, the dim lights flickering as a chill wind swept through the alley. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were all being watched. The investigation, the verdict, Laura's hopelessness. It all felt too perfectly orchestrated. "I need to see it for myself," Marcus muttered under his breath. He had trusted the system, but the system had failed. It was time to dig deeper, to find the cracks in the armor. He knew the risks, but at this point, what was left to lose? His hands clenched into fists, his mind already calculating his next move. But a nagging question remained, one that clawed at his thoughts. Who was behind this? Who had orchestrated their downfall? As the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, Marcus couldn't help but wonder if they were all walking into something far worse than they realized. The city lights flickered, casting long shadows on the rain-slicked streets. Detective Marcus Westbrook could hear the rapid footfalls behind him, the echo of someone chasing him, but he didn't dare look back. His instincts screamed to run faster, but there was no escape. The chase had begun. The case he thought he understood had turned into something darker, and now the danger was real. "I told you not to follow me," Marcus snapped, his voice low yet sharp as he pushed through the crowded streets. Behind him, Emma Clarke wasn't backing down. "You can't solve this alone," she shot back, her voice filled with urgency. "I'll be damned if I stand on the sidelines now." The air between them crackled with tension as they weaved through the crowd, unaware of the dangerous game they had entered. Each step Marcus took felt heavier, as if the shadows around him were closing in. His pulse quickened. Was the person following him a friend? Or a foe? They finally slowed down, ducking into a nearby alley. The chase had been relentless, but now there was a brief, quiet moment. Marcus leaned against the wall, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. "We're not safe here," he muttered, wiping rain from his brow. Emma stood beside him, her breath shallow, but her eyes sharp. "We're safe for now," she replied, though there was a flicker of doubt in her voice. "But I think we've been noticed." Marcus turned toward her, brow furrowed. "By who?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she scanned the alley, as if searching for answers in the shadows. It was clear that Emma knew more than she let on, but Marcus wasn't ready to trust her fully. Still, they had no choice but to move forward. "I'll get you to the safe house," he said, but his words felt hollow in the face of the unknown danger that loomed ahead. The silence was broken by the sharp sound of a phone ringing. Marcus reached for it, his hand trembling as he saw the unknown number. He answered, but before he could speak, a voice on the other end cut through the air, cold and calculated. "You've been digging where you shouldn't." The voice said, each word laced with venom. "And now you've put yourself in a very dangerous position." Marcus's heart raced, his eyes flicking to Emma, who seemed unnervingly calm. The voice continued, "You think you're in control, Marcus, but you're just a pawn in a much larger game. Don't make the mistake of thinking otherwise." The line went dead, leaving only the sound of Marcus' ragged breath. The weight of the words hung in the air, and for the first time Marcus felt the true depth of the conspiracy they had stumbled into. Someone powerful was pulling the strings. But who? Marcus sat at the table in the dimly lit room of the safe house, his fingers drumming impatiently. Emma sat across from him, her gaze fixed on the door. The room was small, cluttered with old furniture and dusty windows. Outside, the city hummed with life, but here, it felt as if the world had stopped. "We've been played, Marcus," Emma said, her voice surprisingly calm for the weight of her words. "All this time, we thought we were the ones chasing the truth. But the truth's been chasing us." Marcus looked at her, his expression hard. "What are you getting at?" "There's someone inside," she replied cryptically. "Someone who's been feeding us the wrong information, manipulating the case. Someone you trust." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Who could it be? He'd trusted everyone around him, but now doubt crept into his mind like a slow poison. Was there anyone left he could truly trust? The decision had been made. Marcus stood in front of the door, his hand resting on the doorknob. Emma stood beside him, waiting, her eyes filled with determination. "This isn't just about the case anymore," Marcus said quietly, more to himself than to Emma. "This is about survival." The weight of his words hung in the air, and for a moment, they both stood still, as if frozen in time. Emma broke the silence. "If we don't act now, it'll be too late. We have one shot at this." Marcus nodded, the final pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. They had been led into a trap, but now they had to take control. He knew the risk. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a fight for their lives. As Marcus pushed open the door, he felt the gravity of the decision settle in. There was no turning back now. The evening had settled into an unexpected calm. Marcus Westbrook and Emma Clarke sat in a small diner, their conversation punctuated by the clink of silverware and the hum of low voices around them. They'd made it this far, but the journey was far from over. "You did well back there," Marcus said, trying to break the silence. Emma nodded but didn't meet his gaze. Her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup, her eyes clouded with something more than exhaustion. "It's not over, Marcus. We haven't even scratched the surface," she replied quietly. He studied her for a moment, unsure if her words were a warning or a promise. Just then, a man in a dark suit entered the diner. He looked out of place, scanning the room with a deliberate calmness. Marcus felt a shift in the air. Something wasn't right. The man's eyes briefly met his, a cold recognition passing between them. But before Marcus could react, the man smiled and approached their table. "I hear you two are looking for answers," he said, his voice too smooth. Marcus stiffened. Something about him felt off. Was he a friend or an adversary? The man took a seat across from Marcus and Emma, his movements deliberate, as though he had all the time in the world. He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're both looking for the truth, aren't you?" he asked. Emma exchanged a glance with Marcus, her eyes betraying a flicker of doubt. "Who are you?" Marcus asked, his voice low. The man's smile never wavered. "I'm someone who can help," he said. The calmness in his voice was unsettling. "But you have to trust me." Marcus hesitated, but Emma's expression softened. She leaned in, her voice almost a whisper. "We've been trusting people we shouldn't, Marcus. Maybe it's time we trust someone else." There was a tension in the air, thick and palpable. As the man spoke again, his words seemed too perfect, too calculated. "You can fight this alone. We can help each other. The enemy isn't who you think it is." His cryptic words hung in the air, leaving more questions than answers. Marcus felt a gnawing suspicion, but couldn't shake the feeling that the man was offering something more than help. What if he was lying? What if they were walking straight into a trap? As the man continued speaking, Marcus found himself growing more conflicted. The words made sense, but his instincts screamed that something was wrong. "You don't get it," Marcus said, his voice rising with frustration. "You're just telling us what we want to hear." The man smiled, his gaze unshaken. "Isn't that what everyone does? Tell you what you want to hear?" He paused, letting the words sink in. "You've got to learn to trust people who have the same goals as you, Marcus. There's only so much time before it's too late." His words echoed in Marcus' mind as Emma spoke. "I think he's right, Marcus," she said softly, her voice hesitant. "We've been pushing ourselves too hard. Maybe we need help." But Marcus wasn't sure. The man in front of him seemed like a mirror, reflecting his own doubts and fears. There was a truth to his words, but something about his approach felt off. What if Emma was right, and he was just too blinded by his own mistrust? Could he really afford to doubt everyone now? Marcus couldn't take it anymore. The weight of the situation crashed down on him like a tidal wave. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair over. "This is insane," he shouted. The man's smile faltered for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly, but his voice remained calm. "You're making a mistake, Marcus." Before Marcus could react, Emma turned toward him, her voice sharp. "Stop," she yelled, grabbing his arm. "He's one of us." The words felt like a punch to his gut. "What?" he demanded. Emma's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "You've been looking in the wrong direction. The truth is much closer than you think," she whispered, as if afraid someone might hear. Marcus turned to face her, but his confusion deepened. "What the hell are you talking about, Emma?" But before she could explain, the man in the dark suit grabbed her arm and twisted it behind her back. "You should have listened," he said coldly. Marcus froze in disbelief. Betrayed by the one person he thought he could trust. The silence was deafening after the betrayal. Marcus stumbled backward, his mind racing. How could this have happened? Emma, the one person he had trusted, had led him straight into the trap. He had been so sure of her, of their shared goal. Emma? Why? His voice cracked as the words left his lips. She didn't respond, her face set in an unreadable mask. The man in the dark suit's grip on her tightened, his presence looming over them like a dark cloud. "It's too late for answers, Marcus," the man said coldly, his voice devoid of emotion. "You should have understood the game by now." Marcus was numb, but a fire was beginning to burn inside him. Betrayal, deceit. He wouldn't let it end like this. No matter what, he was going to finish this, one way or another. He took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath. He would find the truth, even if it meant tearing everything apart. The silence in the room was suffocating. Marcus Westbrook sat in the dimly lit room, the echoes of the betrayal still ringing in his ears. He felt a cold emptiness inside, as though a part of him had been ripped away. The quiet hum of the city outside barely penetrated the walls. He had trusted Emma, trusted the wrong people. His hands trembled as he picked up the pieces, trying to make sense of everything. The room felt smaller now, as if the walls were closing in. Marcus breathed in deeply, the stale air in the room filling his lungs. "Why didn't I see it?" he muttered to himself. The sounds of his own voice felt foreign, a stark reminder of how much had changed. Everything he knew, everything he trusted, was shattered. And yet, as the silence stretched on, a faint memory tugged at him. A face, a name, something forgotten that suddenly felt like the key to the entire case. He had missed something. What was it? The memory came back in fragments, like a puzzle missing its pieces. Marcus's mind flashed back to moments he had ignored, signs he had missed. He could hear Emma's voice from that night, the night everything changed. "Trust me, Marcus," she had said. "This is the way forward." The words echoed in his mind as he closed his eyes, trying to piece together the path. The room was cold now, but he remembered the warmth of the night, the certainty in her voice. His memory slipped between the present and the past, the sound of rain tapping against the window blending with Emma's words. His heart raced as he realized something was wrong. Emma had known more than she let on. She had led him into a trap. But why? The answer was closer than he thought. Was she really a victim, or was she playing her own game? The confrontation was inevitable. Marcus stood at the door, the cold air biting at his skin as he took one last deep breath. He knew what he had to do. When Emma entered the room, her expression unreadable, the tension was palpable. "You lied to me, Emma," Marcus said, his voice sharp, breaking the silence. Emma's face flickered with something. Guilt, fear, or maybe just uncertainty. But she didn't speak. The room felt heavy, the air thick with unspoken words. "Why?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking as he took a step toward her. The distance between them felt vast now, the bond they once shared completely broken. Emma finally spoke, her words laced with bitterness. "Because you were always too blind to see the truth, Marcus. You weren't supposed to find out." His heart sank as he listened to the finality in her voice. Was she just another pawn in the game? Or had he been blind to something much darker? Emma's words stung. "The truth is," she began, her voice steady, "we were never on the same side, Marcus. You were always chasing the wrong thing." Marcus stood frozen, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice hoarse with disbelief. Emma's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "The enemy isn't who you think it is," she continued, her eyes narrowing. "You've been chasing shadows, Marcus. The real power," she paused, her lips curling into a faint, knowing smile, "is much closer to you than you think." Marcus' mind raced, but before he could respond, the door behind them opened with a soft creak, and a new figure stepped into the room. It was the man in the dark suit, the one who had been shadowing them all along. "She's right, Marcus," he said, his voice smooth. "You've been looking in all the wrong places." The truth was dawning on him, but it was a truth far darker than he had ever imagined. Marcus stood alone in the silence, the room now empty of the people who had once meant so much to him. The betrayal had cut deeper than he thought possible. He had lost trust, lost faith, and now, all that was left was the cold truth. "So this was the truth all along," Marcus murmured to himself, his voice barely a whisper. The weight of the knowledge pressed down on him like a physical force, but now there was no turning back. The pieces of the puzzle had finally fallen into place, and he could see the full picture, one he never wanted to understand. But the loss was not without its purpose. The truth had set him free, even if it meant the end of everything he had once believed. He could feel his resolve harden, the fire inside him reigniting. "It's time to make them pay," he said, his voice steady now, filled with a quiet determination. The road ahead was uncertain, but he knew what he had to do. The final confrontation was coming, and this time he was ready. The tension in the air was palpable. Every breath felt heavy, every step a warning. Marcus Westbrook's pulse raced as he approached the room, the low hum of distant voices echoing off the wall. He could hear his own heart pounding in his ears, drowning out everything else. The flickering of the overhead light seemed to mirror the growing uncertainty in his chest. Emma Clarke stood beside him, her face set in stone, but her eyes betrayed a hint of fear. "This is it," Marcus said, his voice a low whisper, barely audible above the silence. Emma nodded, the moment heavy between them. A door creaked open, the sound like a signal. They both braced themselves. There was no turning back now. The final confrontation was upon them, the truth waiting on the other side of that door. Marcus exhaled sharply, ready to face whatever waited for him. Every step felt like a leap into the unknown, and yet there was a quiet certainty building within him. Whatever happened next, the truth would be laid bare. The door swung open with a groan, and the man in the dark suit stepped forward, his smile colder than ever. "I knew you would come," he said, his voice calm, as if he had been expecting this moment all along. Marcus's fists clenched at his sides, the anger rising within him. "Why?" Marcus demanded, his voice raw with frustration. "Why all the lies?" The man's smile never faltered. "Lies? No, Marcus, I only gave you the truth in the way you could handle it. You were never meant to see the full picture." Emma stepped forward, her voice shaking. "You were using us from the beginning." The man's gaze shifted to Emma, his eyes cold. "I'm not the one who betrayed you, Emma," he said, his tone laced with dark amusement. "You were always the one playing the game." Marcus's mind spun. The lines between right and wrong were beginning to blur, and with every word the truth became harder to see. He stepped closer, his voice trembling with rage. "You'll pay for this," he said, his words filled with finality. As the confrontation escalated, Emma suddenly lunged forward, her movements quick and desperate. She grabbed the man by the arm, pulling him toward her with a strength Marcus hadn't known she possessed. But in that moment something snapped. The man's expression darkened, and with one swift motion he shoved her back, sending her crashing to the floor. "Emma!" Marcus shouted, his heart pounding in his chest. He rushed forward, but the man blocked his path, his eyes gleaming with a mix of malice and amusement. "This is the price of playing with fire," the man said, his voice low and menacing. Marcus' breath caught in his throat as he watched Emma struggle to rise, blood dripping from a wound on her forehead. Her pain was like a knife in his chest. In that moment he knew the cost of everything he had fought for. The battle had never been about winning. It had always been about sacrifice. "No more games," Marcus said, his voice fierce. "It ends here." The final showdown was upon them. Marcus, his anger burning brighter than ever, faced the man with a single purpose: to end it. "You think you've won?" Marcus asked, his voice steady, his resolve unwavering. "You've lost everything." The man in the dark suit chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "No, Marcus, I've already won. You just don't know it yet." The words stung, but Marcus' resolve only deepened. He could feel the weight of everything, his pain, his loss, his anger, all fueling him. With one final push, Marcus lunged at the man, his body moving with the speed and force of a man driven by pure emotion. The fight was brutal, a blur of movement and anger. The man fought back, his calm demeanor now replaced by a vicious determination. But Marcus didn't care about the consequences anymore. He had to end this for Emma, for himself, for the truth. The struggle was fierce, but in the end, only one could stand. The battle was over, but the cost was heavy. Marcus stood over the man in the dark suit, his chest heaving with exhaustion and adrenaline. The room was silent now, save for the sound of his heavy breathing. Emma was still on the floor, her wounds slowly healing, but the emotional toll of the battle had left its mark on them both. "It's over," Marcus said, his voice hoarse, his eyes empty with the weight of everything he had lost. There was no victory here, only the hollow echo of truth. He turned toward Emma, his heart breaking as he saw the pain in her eyes. "We made it," he whispered. But the words felt empty. The fight was over, but the journey had only just begun. What now? The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncertain, as they stood in the aftermath of the confrontation. The dust had settled, but the air was thick with the aftermath. The world outside had returned to its usual rhythm, unaware of the battle fought just hours ago. Marcus Westbrook stood in the empty street, the silence around him deafening. His heart still raced from the confrontation, but now there was nothing but stillness. The once bustling city now seemed foreign, as if the world itself had moved on without him. He felt lost, as though the battle had stripped away everything he knew. The weight of the loss was suffocating. His eyes wandered to Emma Clarke, sitting silently on a nearby bench, her face drawn and tired. Their lives had been irrevocably changed. They had fought for the truth, but what had they really won? What had they truly lost? The question lingered in the air like a cold fog. Marcus exhaled slowly, realizing that the cost of everything was higher than he had ever imagined. Marcus's mind raced as he stood in the silence, the past few days replaying in his head like a broken record. Guilt, regret, and a strange sense of relief mixed inside him. He hadn't asked for any of this, yet he had been swept up in the storm. The pain of losing Emma, of losing the trust he had so blindly given, weighed heavily on it. He could still hear her words, faint whispers of betrayal and forgiveness, echoing in his mind. The city's familiar sounds returned, but they felt muted, distant. He looked up, feeling the sharp sting of loss. He had fought for the truth, but now, as he stood in the wreckage, he wondered if the truth had been worth it. Maybe it was always meant to be this way, Marcus whispered to himself. The world kept moving, but inside him, everything had shifted. Life would continue, but it would never be the same again. As Marcus continued to walk, Emma Clarke caught up to him. She had been silent, but now she stood beside him, her presence a quiet comfort. "You okay?" she asked softly. Marcus glanced at her, his eyes betraying the weight he carried. "I don't know anymore," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. Emma offered a faint, weary smile. "You're not alone in this," she said, her voice soft but steady. It wasn't the same as before. They had been through too much for things to return to how they were. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of hope, of understanding. "We're different now," Marcus replied quietly, his voice full of regret but also acceptance. He had lost much, but in the silence between them, he realized that perhaps this was the moment where they could rebuild. Not the way they once had, but something stronger, a bond forged in truth, no matter how painful. As the two of them walked in silence, Marcus's mind wandered back to the lessons he had learned. Lessons taught by those he had lost. He thought of the mentor who had once shown him the way, the one who had believed in him when no one else did. "You can't change the past, Marcus." The voice of his mentor echoed in his mind. "But you can shape the future with what you do next." The memory of those words brought a small, bittersweet smile to his face. They had stuck with him all this time, even as everything had crumbled. The world had been a different place then, full of possibilities. But now, Marcus understood that the true lesson wasn't in the fight, but in the acceptance of the consequences of that fight. He had fought for the truth, but now it was time to live with it. It was time to rebuild. The sun was setting as Marcus stood by the river, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The city's skyline was bathed in the soft light of twilight, a peaceful contrast to the chaos of the past days. "It's done," Marcus whispered to himself, his voice carrying the weight of everything he had endured. The fight was over, the truth revealed. There would be no grand victory or triumph, only a quiet understanding that the world was as it always had been. But he was changed. "I've made my peace," he said, his words as much for himself as for the world around him. The past was behind him now, and with it, the burden of his search for justice. The future was uncertain, but Marcus knew that he would face it differently, stronger, wiser. And as the river flowed gently before him, he felt a sense of calm, of acceptance. The world was still spinning, and he was finally ready to let it take him wherever it would. The world had settled into an eerie silence. Marcus Westbrook stood at the edge of the pier, his eyes lost in the vastness of the dark ocean. The chaos of the past days felt distant now, like a fading dream. The winds were quiet, the air thick with the weight of everything that had happened. He could still hear the distant echoes of voices, of moments that had shaped his journey. But they no longer held power over him. What remained was the aftermath, the space between the truth and what had been lost. He thought of the people who were gone, of the trust that had been shattered, and the price of the choices he had made. The night was still, the city lights flickering behind him, but the calm only served to highlight the emptiness inside him. Was it worth it? The question lingered unanswered as the stillness wrapped around him. Marcus took a deep breath and turned to walk away from the pier, his footsteps soft but deliberate. The night had changed him, and as he walked, he felt the weight of the world shift. The truth had been revealed, and now there was nothing left but the future. Emma Clarke, who had been standing silently nearby, joined him. She walked beside him, her presence calm but steady. "Where do we go from here?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Marcus didn't answer right away. The question hung in the air, but neither of them needed to speak. They both knew the road ahead would be uncertain, but it would be theirs to walk. Together, his silence was acceptance, not just of the journey ahead, but of the new reality they both had to face. The past was gone. What remained was the future, difficult, but possible. Marcus sat alone in the small apartment, the faint sounds of the city drifting in from the window. On the table before him lay a letter, one that had been written long ago but had never been read. It was from his mentor, the one who had shown him the way in the beginning. He opened it slowly, the weight of the words almost too much to bear. "Trust yourself," the letter began, "even when you feel lost. The truth is never easy, but it is always worth finding." The words felt like a distant memory, yet they held a new meaning now. Marcus ran his fingers over the paper, feeling the connection to the past, to everything that had led him here. He had fought for the truth, and though it had cost him dearly, it was his now. The lesson had been clear, but it had only truly come to him in this moment. The past was gone, but the lessons he had learned would remain forever. Days passed and life slowly returned to its rhythm. The city continued to buzz with life, oblivious to the transformation that had taken place in Marcus' heart. He walked through the crowded streets, his movements slower now, as if each step was measured and deliberate. He had learned the hard way that the world moved on, regardless of what happened to individuals. But Marcus had changed. He had let go of the anger, the guilt. What mattered now was moving forward, not dwelling on the past. He looked up and saw a group of children laughing, playing in the park, the simplicity of their joy grounding him in the present. He understood, now more than ever, that life would continue, that it was up to him to shape it in the way he saw fit. He wasn't sure what that looked like yet, but he would find it. Slowly, piece by piece, Marcus stood at the window, the view of the city before him. He had come a long way, physically and emotionally. The battle had been fought, and the truth had been revealed. Now there was nothing left but the quiet aftermath. His reflection in the window looked back at him, as if reminding him of all that he had been through. "It's over," he whispered, the words carrying the weight of everything that had happened. There was no triumph, no fanfare, just the quiet understanding that the journey had come to its end. The world was still turning, and so was he. With a final breath, Marcus turned away from the window, a faint but resolute smile on his lips. He had lived through the storm, and now he was ready to find his peace. The world was vast, but so was his new understanding. And with that, he walked away, knowing that he had done everything he could.